So good evening, everybody. On behalf of Cuts International, let me welcome all of you. Today's program is in partnership with the Overseas Development Institute, which is now known as ODI Global. So let me welcome Professor Vignaraja, our old friend Dirk, and Rathin, and also Prachi. So today's topic is deepening India-Sri Lanka trade and economic cooperation in uncertain global economic times. What we are witnessing today is that there is more and more unpredictability in the trading system, and not just trading system, in the overall international governance system. What we are dealing with today is more of the nature of uncertainty. So the probability of risk and risk management becomes more and more difficult. Ambassador Coloni, she is with us today, and she is going to give a special remarks to us on this. The two things primarily. One is the how this trajectory has moved over the last couple of decades, at least, or last quarter of a century, since the implementation of the India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, which incidentally is one of the first free trade agreement that India has entered into. So welcome, madam, to our platform.
India and Sri Lanka are the closest of neighbors, not just in terms of geographic proximity, but naturally, in every conceivable way, is a given. History, culture, language, religion, food, dance, music, attire. It is impossible to think of any aspect of life in Sri Lanka that is not connected to India in some way or the other. A $3 trillion economy, India is projected to become the world's third largest economy by 2030, with a projected GDP of 7.3 trillion. The expectation is that India will become a $10 trillion economy by 2032 and a developed country with a $30 trillion economy by 2047. Sri Lanka has much to learn from India's growth story, particularly from the years of decisive governance and visionary reforms under Prime Minister Modi's leadership since 2014. This includes the Digital India initiative that has revolutionized access to technology and governance. As you all know, India is Sri Lanka's largest trading partner, a key investor, and largest source of tourism. The India-Sri Lanka FTA that you mentioned entered into force 2.5 decades ago and has contributed much to expansion of trade between the two countries. But there is much that needs to be done. Today, we are at an important point where relations between our two countries are concerned, perhaps one that can be described as a unique moment in India-Sri Lanka relations. The back-to-back state visits by President Anurukumara Dissanayake and Prime Minister Modi, just about 4 months apart, have placed relations at an all-time high, and this is a moment that must be seized, especially by the business communities on both sides. For Sri Lanka, the obvious path to ensuring growth and prosperity for her people is to partner with India and seize and maximize opportunities that India offers in every aspect, including markets, investments, services, and technology. India-Sri Lanka relations, especially in trade and investment, must not be seen as a zero-sum game. It is to the advantage of both countries that business communities on both sides of the Pork Strait begin to focus on the long-term view, treating Sri Lanka as part of the Indian subcontinent and a common space when it comes to trade and investment. It is important that the business communities on both sides also step into this domain to reassure, inform, and inspire confidence in the public about how they would be the beneficiaries of fair competition, greater trade and investment being mobilized between the two countries. Joint initiatives and investment in the tourism and leisure industry are worthy avenues to explore.
Only 7% of Sri Lanka's exports go to India in terms of trading goods. Only 3% of export of services from Sri Lanka go to India, and I think there's a huge potential there to increase this. And so we want to know, and that's perhaps the exam question for this seminar, is: are there particular barriers that we can think about? Are there particular approaches that we can think about that can unlock these opportunities on both sides? And what are these opportunities? What does there need to be a different approach in India towards Sri Lanka, or does there need to be a different approach to trade and investment in Sri Lanka, in particular in relation to India, to unlock this? And we think there's a huge potential there.
My proposition is that the India-Sri Lanka partnership can really be a model for South Asian regional cooperation more generally, right? And that's stuck, as we all know. And how do we think about that? And also as a way of sort of getting the neighborhood first policy with much more impact than perhaps might have been. And also enhance India's status as it's thinking of it's a G5 country and even above that, and it has aspirations in the United Nations context. So it's about those issues that I think are very important if we get this relationship right. So that's the reasoning behind it. Because geography determines trade flows, we should really expand the trade with the states that are nearest geographically, right, to Sri Lanka, and the cities. And so really it's the small business chambers and the SMEs, right? And really we're talking about the south of India, come up with a trade deal that fits the supply chain environment. And that's a very different trade deal to what's there in the ECTA framework.
Now there is a word called Mahasagar, means in very big Indian Ocean, expanding, and Sri Lanka is kind of a necklace, which is very well reasoned for connecting to all of them, and etc. etc. Sri Lanka is also as a member country for International Solar Alliance, which is centered in Delhi. Sri Lanka is also a member for Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, CDRI. So using them, it will be, strengthening the training and capacity building for the engineers, electricity board, etc., etc. And plus, other option is the renewable energy. I was told that wind power, if the grid is connected, it can be used, excess wind power, sending back to India using those things.
So a strategy formulation where export-led growth has been identified as an objective, I think that becomes the most important task as far as looking at Sri Lanka from a domestic perspective is concerned. How and where do we see the India-Sri Lanka cooperation in terms of trade specifically, value chain integration to economic integration in a larger context? Why do I say this? Because I think there have been, we've heard as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, its interest both in terms of joining the RCEP, its interest also in terms of joining the CPTPP, India-ASEAN FTA has just been mentioned. Plus, there is the long pending update of the India-Sri Lanka FTA itself to a higher grade. But in terms of green technology, that would be absolutely essential here. I think that is where some kind of collaborative efforts, taking forward the existing comparative advantage, but looking at it from the perspective of what are going to be the modern day challenges to this sector.
Everybody here agrees that India is the biggest exporter of tourists to Sri Lanka. A lot of that export is actually not coming out in the official figures of Sri Lanka's services exports. What is also not coming up in the services exports figures is the use of the transshipment services of Indian cargo to the world. That is also not very well captured. So if you do include both these elements, I think you will see that Sri Lanka does much more in terms of services exports to India. I think, Madam High Commissioner Designate, I would really urge you to look at the RMG not as a showstopper, but as something that can become the enabler of the relationship between these two countries.
With just one sort of disciplining constraint, which as a fiscal economist I think all governments should have, which is the interest rate will be linked to your rate of inflation. And at 2%. So this is a great incentive not to get into the Argentina problem, you see, because the higher your rate of inflation, the more tempting it is for you to take on debt and inflate it away. So keeping the interest payment linked, and 2% is negotiable. You can make it 1, you can make it 0.5, but it has to be a real rate of interest that goes back. To an extent, therefore, this is a return to history, where you have the biggest economy in the region using the rupee fairly as a currency of settlement, without impinging on fiscal autonomy or monetary autonomy.
Ganesh referred to aid for trade, which is a very useful concept, oversold at times, but the success of those ideas depend on what is the substantive content of that. So it will be very important to even do a review of the previous aid for trade initiatives which are relevant for India and Sri Lanka.
Logistical solutions, and I would go so far as to say logistical companies as well. Is there a possibility of a collaboration on that? And on services, I completely take Preetham's point that a lot of services trade may go unrecorded. Nevertheless, the point is that there is a scope for collaboration. And Sri Lanka has, in a way, I would say, sophisticated logistical services. And that's something we would talk about, a joint venture or investments, to see how it could be used.
Just want to say thank you. It was a lovely evening, and I enjoyed listening to the various ideas and proposals and so on.
So thank you so much for these excellent comments and ideas, and yeah, we hope to liaise with you. So we have a plan for a further publication on this, and also then to work further on this, because we're committed to this importance that the Sri Lanka-India relations have in particularly Sri Lankan growth, but I think also here for India, and I think we heard also that Sri Lanka is important for India. So thank you so much.